So picture this. It's late December 2025, and Iran's president drops an absolute bombshell of a declaration. He says his country is in a massive, undeclared war with the West. But this wasn't about some new invasion. To really get what he was talking about, we have to rewind the clock and deconstruct the incredibly explosive events of June 2025.
And there it is. That's the statement from President Masoud Pezeshkian, and it was even published on Supreme Leader Khamenei's website. He went on to say this conflict was, quote, more complicated and more difficult than the absolutely brutal Iran-Iraq war back in the 80s. I mean, that is a jaw-dropping claim.
Okay, so you hear that, and you have to ask, right? What war? There were no official declarations, no tanks rolling across borders. What kind of conflict could possibly be worse than a war that left 1 million people dead? Well, the answer is hidden a few months earlier, in a shadowy, high-stakes battle fought entirely in the skies. So in this explainer, here's what we're going to break down. We'll look at the rhetoric behind this full-scale war. Then we'll dive into the 12-day air war from June. We'll get into the details of the huge U.S. mission, Operation Midnight Hammer. We'll sift through all the conflicting reports about how successful it was. Then we'll look at the shaky ceasefire that followed. And finally, we'll try to figure out what it all means for the future.
All right, first things first. Let's put that full-scale war comment into some real context.
So, President Pezeshkian wasn't really announcing a new war was starting. What he was doing was looking back at that intense 12-day air conflict from June and basically reframing it. He was saying that was the real war. His point was that unlike the clear front lines of the Iran-Iraq war, this was a battle on all fronts, economic, political, and military, and he claimed it was all designed to bring Iran to its knees.
Okay, so let's rewind. Let's go back to that critical month and walk through exactly how this whole thing escalated so quickly. It all kicks off on June 13th with a surprise attack from Israel. For the next 9 days, it's back and forth, with Iran launching wave after wave of missiles and drones. But then, June 22nd, that's when things get really serious. The United States jumps into the fight directly. A day later, Iran hits back, targeting a huge U.S. airbase. And then, just as quickly as it all started, a ceasefire is patched together on June 24th, bringing those 12 days of chaos to a halt. And even before the U.S. got directly involved, the human cost was already climbing. Iran reported nearly 1,100 people killed, and that list included some very high-value targets. We're talking senior military commanders and top nuclear scientists. In Israel, those retaliatory strikes killed between 28 and 33 people. But the biggest military move of the conflict, well, that was still to come.
And that brings us to the tipping point. The moment this stopped being a regional fight and became a direct, head-to-head confrontation between the United States and Iran.
The U.S. mission had a code name, and it was a dramatic one: Operation Midnight Hammer. The objective was incredibly bold and singular, to essentially cripple Iran's ability to enrich nuclear material all in one single, overwhelming attack. And this is just wild when you look at how they pulled it off. It all started with 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, get this, flying a non-stop 18-hour mission all the way from their base in Missouri. They had stealth fighters run interference, flying in first to draw away Iranian air defenses. Then the B-2s came in and dropped these massive bunker buster bombs on the most protected sites. And at the exact same time, a U.S. submarine launched a volley of 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Just a stunningly complex operation. Just to give you a sense of the sheer firepower we're talking about, look at this number. The Fordow nuclear facility, it's not just underground, it's buried deep inside a mountain. We're talking 80 to 90 meters of rock and concrete. To get through that, the U.S. used multiple GBU-57 bombs. Each one of those bombs weighs 30,000 pounds. And this wasn't just any bomb. It was the very first time this weapon had ever been used in combat.
So, the attack happens. It's massive. But in the immediate aftermath, trying to figure out what actually worked, well, that's where the fog of war really rolls in. Everyone had a different story.
The official line from the White House was unequivocal. There was no room for doubt. In a televised address just hours after the attack, President Trump declared total victory, saying Iran's most important facilities had been, quote, completely and totally obliterated.
But this is where the story gets super interesting, because you have this total clash of narratives. The Trump administration was saying obliterated and claiming a 2-year setback for Iran. But then a leaked report from the Defense Intelligence Agency painted a very different picture. It said the sites were damaged, sure, but not destroyed.
And the setback was maybe only a few months. Meanwhile, Iranian officials admitted to significant and serious damages, and the IAEA, the International Nuclear Watchdog, said the site suffered enormous damage. So the bottom line? The truth was completely murky.
So, while the bombs stopped falling on June 24th, the conflict itself, oh, it was a long way from being over. The standoff just entered a new phase.
Iran's response was pure defiance. They immediately kicked out all the international nuclear inspectors from the country, and they said they wouldn't let them back in until the agency figured out what they called post-war conditions. On top of that, Supreme Leader Khamenei flat out rejected any talk of surrender. Instead, he spun the whole thing as a strategic victory, that Iran had survived a 12-day onslaught and was still standing.
And that defiant posture? Well, it brings us to the biggest, most important question of all. What are the real long-term consequences of this whole episode?
You know, it's fascinating because analysts are completely split on how to read the outcome. On one side, you've got the argument that Iran's whole security strategy just got blown up. For decades, their model was deterrence, basically making an attack so painful that no one would dare try it. But in June, both Israel and the US called their bluff and hit them directly. That punctured their whole aura of invincibility. But there's the other way to look at it. This camp says Iran's leadership sees this completely differently. From their point of view, they stared down two of the most powerful militaries on Earth, didn't collapse, and lived to fight another day. For them, that wasn't a defeat. It was a test that they passed.
And this quote from analyst Shahram Koldi just nails that second point of view. The very act of surviving, what was absolutely designed to be a knockout blow, internally, that's not seen as weakness. It's seen as a source of strength and resolve. And that leads to a really chilling conclusion. If Iran's leaders genuinely believe they've already weathered the worst possible storm, they might feel emboldened. They might be willing to risk more next time. So the conflict, which was supposed to reduce a threat, may have paradoxically created a more volatile, more unpredictable situation where the risk of a future miscalculation is actually higher than it was before.
So that's the central question we're left with. The strikes may have left Iran's nuclear facilities battered and bruised, but did they actually weaken the regime's resolve? Or, by surviving the storm, has Iran emerged from the rubble feeling more defiant, more resilient, and ultimately more dangerous than ever before?